What happens when a gate agent's snap judgment collides with a power she could never have imagined? This isn't just a story about a missed flight. It's about the quiet humiliation that so many endure, and the thunderous reckoning that follows when one of those silent victims is the daughter of the most powerful man in aviation. We're about to take you to Gate E14 at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, where a simple request to board a plane spirals into a career-ending multi-million-dollar catastrophe. You'll witness the moment a dismissive smirk turns to sheer panic, and learn how one father's quiet fury completely dismantled a corporate culture of bias, proving that karma doesn't always fly coach. The air in Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was a familiar symphony of chaos. The low hum of thousands of conversations, the rhythmic squeak of rolling luggage wheels on linoleum, the distant, distorted announcements of final boarding calls. It was the sound of a world in motion. Dr. Zara Mallory, however, was a small island of stillness in this frantic sea. At 27, she had just spent the last 5 years of her life in the quiet, sterile confines of a molecular biology lab, culminating in a doctoral degree that felt heavier in her mind than the diploma did in her luggage. This trip was her reward, a graduation gift from her parents, a first-class, round-trip ticket to London on Global Voyager Airlines. It was an extravagance she would never have purchased for herself, but her parents had insisted. "You've earned the right to turn left when you get on a plane, Z," her father had said, his voice warm with pride. Zara felt a small, guilty thrill just holding the boarding pass on her phone. The bold letters, "First," seemed like a pass to another world. She was dressed for the 10-hour flight in comfortable but chic black joggers, a cashmere hoodie, and pristine white sneakers. Her hair was styled in neat shoulder-length braids. A pair of noise-canceling headphones hung around her neck, a shield against the airport's clamor. She looked like a young woman who valued comfort and style, a portrait of modern success. She arrived at Gate E14 with 45 minutes to spare. The gate area was a microcosm of the airport itself, a mix of anxious families, weary business travelers, and excited tourists. Zara found a seat near the window, watching the ground crew scurry around the colossal Boeing 777 that would be her chariot across the Atlantic. The gate agent, a woman whose name tag read Karen Preston, had a look of perpetual sourness, as if she'd just sipped milk that had turned. She was a woman in her late 40s with a tight blonde bob that looked like a helmet and a sharp, probing gaze she used to scan the crowd. She moved with an air of stressed importance, her voice already strained as she made an announcement about checking oversized carry-ons. Zara watched her, a flicker of sympathy stirring. It had to be a stressful job, being the sole authority figure for hundreds of anxious people. Finally, the moment arrived. Karen's voice cut through the air, sharp and impatient. "We will now begin boarding Global Voyager Flight 22 to London Heathrow. We invite our active duty military personnel and anyone needing special assistance to pre-board at this time." After a brief pause, she continued. "We now invite our first-class passengers to board, first class only at this time." That was her cue. Zara stood, took a deep breath, and joined the short line of 4 other people forming at the boarding lane. In front of her was a man in a tailored suit and a couple in their 60s who looked like they lived on a golf course. No one paid her any mind. When it was her turn, Zara smiled politely and held out her phone to the scanner. Karen Preston's eyes flickered from the phone screen to Zara's face, and then did a slow, deliberate sweep of her outfit, from her sneakers up to her braided hair. A tiny, almost imperceptible frown line deepened between her brows. "This is for first-class boarding only, ma'am," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Zara's smile faltered. "Yes, I know. I'm in first class." Karen didn't look at the phone again. She kept her eyes on Zara. "The line for general boarding will be called in a little while. You'll need to step aside." The implication was as clear as it was insulting. Zara felt a hot flush of anger creep up her neck, but she fought to keep her voice even. This was a classic test. She'd faced them her whole life. "I think you'll find that my ticket is for seat 3A. Zara said calmly, tapping her phone screen to make it brighter. It's first class. You can see it right there. The man in the suit behind her shifted his weight impatiently. The couple peered around him, their curiosity piqued. Karen let out an exaggerated sigh, as if dealing with a willfully ignorant child. She took the phone from Zara's hand, her painted nails clicking on the glass. She squinted at it, then looked back at Zara. Sometimes people buy economy tickets and get in the wrong line by mistake. It's okay, she said, her tone suggesting Zara was too simple to understand. I didn't make a mistake, Zara said, her voice a little firmer now. I'm in seat 3A. Please, just scan the ticket. Karen's lips tightened into a thin, bloodless line. It was as if Zara's refusal to be dismissed and patronized was a personal affront. She was challenging her authority, her judgment. I'm going to need to see some identification, Karen snapped, holding the phone hostage. And the credit card used to purchase this ticket. Zara's jaw tightened. This was absurd. No one else had been asked for this. My ID is in my bag, but why? The name on the ticket is Zara Mallory. My face is right here. The ticket is valid. Policy, Karen said, the word a brick wall. We have to be on the lookout for fraudulent tickets, especially for premium seats. The unspoken words, especially for people like you, hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The line behind Zara was growing. The man in the suit muttered something under his breath. The embarrassment was a physical weight. Zara felt dozens of eyes on her, judging, assuming. They saw a young black woman being held up by a gate agent, and their minds filled in the blanks with a story she knew all too well. This is ridiculous, Zara said, her composure starting to fray. Can you please just scan the pass or call your supervisor? This was the wrong thing to say. To Karen, calling a supervisor was an admission of defeat. Her face hardened, and her eyes took on a flinty, vindictive glint. She was no longer a stressed employee. She was a warrior defending the sanctity of her gate. She pushed Zara's phone back into her hand. Ma'am, I'm telling you there is an issue with this ticket. It is not scanning properly. She hadn't even tried to scan it again. You are holding up the line for our legitimate first-class passengers. I need you to step over there. She pointed to a desolate spot away from the podium. And we will sort this out after general boarding is complete. If you don't step aside now, I will be forced to call airport security. The threat of security was the final, humiliating blow. The accusation was now public. She wasn't just a passenger with a ticket issue. She was a problem, a potential threat. The man in the suit huffed. For God's sake, just move aside. Tears of pure rage and mortification pricked at the back of Zara's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She looked at Karen's smug, triumphant face. She looked at the impatient, judgmental faces in the line behind her. She felt small, powerless, and utterly incandescent with fury. With as much dignity as she could muster, she gave a stiff nod, turned away from the podium, and walked to the spot Karen had indicated. Her legs felt like lead. The sounds of the airport seemed to fade into a dull roar in her ears. She could feel the stairs on her back. She stood there for a moment, her body trembling with a cocktail of adrenaline and shame. She watched as the man in the suit and the older couple breezed through, their tickets scanning without a hitch. Karen Preston shot her a triumphant smirk before turning to the next passenger. Zara's training as a scientist took over. Emotion was a variable that clouded judgment. She needed to control the variables, collect data, and proceed logically. She took a deep, shuddering breath to calm the storm inside her. Her father's words echoed in her mind, not from his recent proud pronouncement, but from a lifetime of advice on how to navigate a world that would often see her as she was seen today. Stay calm, Z. Don't let them make you the aggressor. Be smarter. Be more prepared. And if that fails, you call me. She pulled her phone from her pocket. Her hands were shaking, but she forced her fingers to be steady. She didn't search for the airline's customer service number. She didn't open Twitter to fire off an angry tweet. She went to her favorites and pressed the first name on the list. Dad. It rang once, twice. Hey, Z-Bug, you at the gate? Ready to fly in style? His voice was a warm, familiar blanket. The sound of his voice, so full of love and pride, nearly broke her. The tears she'd held back now threatened to spill over. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "I have a problem." Marcus Mallory was in a sterile, windowless conference room in the FAA's Southern Region headquarters, a nondescript office building just a few miles from the airport. He was sitting at the head of a long table, listening to a presentation on runway incursion data. The charts were dense, the coffee was lukewarm, and the meeting had been dragging on for 2 hours. He was the Deputy Administrator for Aviation Safety for the entire Federal Aviation Administration. His days were a meticulous dance of regulations, risk assessments, and bureaucratic maneuvering. He was a man who lived and breathed the cold, hard data of aviation. His phone, set to vibrate, buzzed quietly on the table beside his leather-bound notebook. He glanced at the screen. Z-Bug. His entire demeanor shifted. The stoic, authoritative mask of the Deputy Administrator dissolved, replaced by the unguarded warmth of a father. He held up a hand, gracefully interrupting the presenter. "Gentlemen, please excuse me for one moment. I need to take this," he said, his voice calm but with an undertone that left no room for objection. He stood and stepped out into the quiet hallway, the heavy conference room door clicking shut behind him. "Hey, Z-Bug, you at the gate? Ready to fly in style?" The response he received was not the excited chatter he expected. It was a single word, small and broken. "Dad?" Every parental alarm in Marcus's body went on high alert. He could hear the tremble in his daughter's voice, the forced control holding back a flood of emotion. "I have a problem." Marcus's back straightened. The fatherly warmth was instantly encased in a layer of cool, protective steel. "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Are you safe?" I'm safe," Zara said, and he could hear her take a deep, steadying breath. He had taught her that. "But they won't let me on the plane. The gate agent, she said my ticket is fraudulent. She threatened to call security on me." Marcus closed his eyes for a brief second. A familiar glacial anger began to form deep in his gut. It was an anger he had known his whole life, an anger he had to meticulously control. It was the anger of seeing his brilliant, accomplished daughter reduced to a stereotype by someone with a uniform and a sliver of power. "Okay, Zara, listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice low and even, a stark contrast to the fury building inside him. "What is your gate number?" "E14, Global Voyager to Heathrow." "And the agent's name?" "Karen Preston, it's on her name tag." "Good girl. Now I want you to stay exactly where you are. Do not engage with her further. If she or anyone else speaks to you, be polite, but say nothing more than I am waiting for assistance. If you feel comfortable, and only if you feel you can do so discreetly, I want you to put your phone on video record. Point it down at your feet, but make sure the microphone can pick up everything. Can you do that?" "Yes, Dad." "I'm on my way. I'm about 10 minutes out. Don't worry, Z, we are going to sort this out." He hung up. The hallway felt cold. He took a moment not to calm his anger, but to channel it. Anger was a fuel, but raw. It caused explosions. Refined, it powered engines. Marcus was an expert at refining his anger into focused, overwhelming force. He walked back into the conference room. All eyes were on him. "Apologies, gentlemen. Something has come up that requires my immediate attention. We'll have to reschedule," he said, his tone leaving no doubt that the meeting was over. He gathered his notebook and phone. As the other men began to collect their own things, murmuring in confusion, Marcus walked over to Jim Anderson, the regional administrator. "Jim, I need a car, and I need you to make a discreet call to the airport authority. I want the unedited CCTV footage from gate E14 for the last 30 minutes secured. Not reviewed, not edited, secured. Tell them it's for a pending FAA inquiry. Use my name." Jim's eyes widened slightly. "Marcus, what's going on?" "A personnel issue that is rapidly becoming a regulatory one," Marcus said cryptically. "I'll handle it. Just get me the car and secure that footage." Within minutes, he was in the back of a black sedan, speeding towards Hartsfield-Jackson. He didn't use a siren. He didn't want to arrive like a cavalry charge. That wasn't his style. He preferred the quiet, undeniable weight of his presence. During the ride, he changed his mental state. He wasn't Dad anymore. Dad was angry, hurt, and wanted to yell. That wasn't who Zara needed right now. She needed the deputy administrator. She needed the calm, methodical, and unassailable authority figure he became when he walked into a room full of airline executives after a major incident. He smoothed down his tie and straightened the jacket of his perfectly tailored suit. He looked every inch the powerful government official he was. When the car pulled up to the terminal, he bypassed the usual chaos using his credentials to get through a side entrance and an employee security line. He walked through the terminal with a purposeful stride, his eyes fixed, his expression a mask of professional neutrality. As he approached gate E14, he saw the scene exactly as Zara had described it. General boarding was in full swing, a long, snaking line of passengers shuffling forward. And off to the side, standing alone like a pariah, was his daughter. Her head was held high, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the rigid set of her jaw. She was holding her phone, just as he'd asked. His eyes then shifted to the boarding podium. There was Karen Preston, basking in her domain. She was scanning tickets with a perfunctory air, occasionally barking at someone to straighten their bag in the sizer. Marcus felt that glacial anger churn again, but his face remained impassive. He did not go to his daughter first. That would be the move of a father. He was here in this moment as an official. He walked directly to the boarding podium, stepping into the small gap between the scanner and the passenger line, forcing the entire operation to a halt. Karen looked up, her face instantly creasing with annoyance. "Sir, the line is over there. You'll have to wait your turn." Marcus looked at her, his gaze level and unnervingly calm. "I'm not here to board. I'm here to inquire about a passenger, Miss Zara Mallory." Karen's eyes flickered over to Zara, then back to Marcus. A smirk of understanding crossed her face. "Ah, you must be her father. Look, I'm sorry, but your daughter was causing a disruption. There's an issue with her ticket and she refused to cooperate." She was lying, and she was doing it with the casual ease of someone who had done it before and never been challenged. This was no longer just about bias. This was about a deliberate, malicious falsehood. Marcus's voice dropped, becoming quieter yet somehow more resonant. It cut through the noise of the gate area. "A disruption? Could you please describe the nature of this alleged disruption?" "She was belligerent," Karen said, warming to her story. She clearly thought Marcus was just another angry parent she could stonewall and dismiss. She raised her voice, refused to follow instructions. I had to ask her to step aside for the safety and comfort of our other passengers. Marcus let the lie hang in the air for a beat. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I see. And the issue with her ticket? What was the specific irregularity you found in the system when you scanned it?" Karen's eyes darted for a moment. She was a poor liar when faced with specific questions. The scanner couldn't read it. It's likely a counterfeit. It happens, you know. People try to scam their way into first class. "So to be clear," Marcus continued, his voice still unnervingly serene, "you are officially stating that Dr. Mallory was belligerent and that her ticket purchased legally through your airline's website is fraudulent. Is that your definitive position?" The use of Dr. Mallory caused a brief flicker of uncertainty in Karen's eyes, but she quickly snuffed it out. Her arrogance was her armor. "Yes, that's the situation," she said firmly. "I have a plane to board. If you and your daughter want to file a complaint, you can do so on the airline's website." She waved a dismissive hand, turning back towards the passenger she had been ignoring. Karen Preston had just made the biggest mistake of her professional life. She had lied. She had doubled down on the lie, and she had done it to a man who had the power to bring the full weight of federal oversight down upon her and her airline. Feeling cornered but still clinging to her perceived authority, Karen picked up the phone at her podium. "David," she said into the receiver, her voice loud enough for Marcus to hear. "I have a situation at E14. A couple of passengers are becoming aggressive. You might want to get down here." She thought she was calling for backup. She had no idea she was just summoning another witness to her own immolation. David Chen, the Global Voyager station supervisor, arrived 5 minutes later. He was a man who moved with the practiced, harried energy of someone who spent his days putting out fires. He was dressed in a slightly better-fitting suit than the other employees, but his tie was askew, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead. His default setting was de-escalation. His job was to make problems go away as quickly and quietly as possible, usually in the airline's favor. He approached the scene with a placating smile already fixed on his face. He saw a well-dressed man in a tense standoff with his best, if most difficult, gate agent, and a young woman standing sullenly to the side. A standard gate dispute. "All right, what seems to be the trouble here?" David asked, his voice projecting an air of reasonable authority. He directed the question to Marcus, correctly identifying him as the focal point of the conflict. Karen jumped in before Marcus could speak. "David, thank goodness. This man's daughter tried to board with a fake first-class ticket. When I told her to step aside, she became belligerent, and now he's here making a scene and holding up my boarding process." David nodded, absorbing his employee's version of events. It was cleaner to back his staff. "Sir," he said, turning to Marcus, "I understand you're upset, but we have a flight that needs to depart on time. If there's an issue with a ticket, we can certainly look into it at the customer service center after the flight has left." Marcus listened to all of this with a preternatural calm. He let both Karen and David state their positions clearly. He let them build and reinforce the official narrative, the narrative that was a complete fabrication. When they were finished, he spoke. His voice was still quiet, but it commanded the space. "My name is Marcus Mallory. This is my daughter, Dr. Zara Mallory. She is the holder of a valid, fully paid first-class ticket for Seat 3A on this flight. She was not belligerent. She was, however, denied boarding, publicly humiliated, and falsely accused of fraud by your employee, Miss Preston." He paused, letting the words sink in. He could see from the corner of his eye that Zara had her phone angled perfectly, the small red dot of the recording icon a silent witness. David Chen's professional smile tightened. "Sir, that's a very serious accusation. Karen is one of our most experienced agents. She stated the ticket wouldn't scan, and that your daughter was causing a disruption. And she is mistaken on both counts," Marcus said flatly. "The truth is, Miss Preston never attempted to scan the ticket in the first place. She made a judgment based on my daughter's appearance and concocted a story to justify it. A story she has now repeated to you." Karen, emboldened by her supervisor's presence, scoffed. "That is not true. I did try to scan it, and she was being aggressive." This was the moment, the pivot point. Marcus had given them every opportunity to reverse course, to ask the right questions, to simply do their jobs. They had refused. Now the quiet inquiry was over. The unveiling was about to begin. Marcus looked from Karen's defiant face to David's weary, dismissive one. He reached slowly into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. For a fleeting second, a flicker of alarm crossed David's face, the primal fear of an unknown confrontation. But Marcus didn't pull out a wallet or a phone. He retrieved a slim, black leather case. He flipped it open with a practiced flick of his wrist. Inside, nestled against dark blue velvet, was a gold badge and a photo ID. The eagle emblem of the United States government gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the terminal. He held it up for David Chen to see. He didn't flash it. He presented it, holding it steady so the words were clear. "I am Marcus Mallory," he said, his voice now imbued with an unmistakable weight of power. "I am the Deputy Administrator for Aviation Safety with the Federal Aviation Administration. And while my daughter's treatment is a personal matter, your employee's fabrication of events, your airline's failure to follow basic procedure, and the potential violation of federal anti-discrimination statutes are now an official one." The change in the atmosphere was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the sound and air out of the immediate vicinity of Gate E14. David Chen's face went from ruddy and stressed to a ghostly, mottled white. His eyes bulged as he read the credentials, his brain struggling to process the cataclysmic turn of events. He looked from the badge to Marcus's face, and for the first time he truly saw him, not as an angry parent, but as one of the most powerful regulators in the global aviation industry. A man who could ground fleets, levy million-dollar fines, and end careers with a single report. Karen Preston was frozen. The smugness on her face had shattered, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The color drained from her cheeks. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She looked at Marcus as if he had just revealed himself to be a phantom. "Now," Marcus continued, his voice cold and precise as a scalpel. He snapped the credential case shut and returned it to his pocket. "Let's stop talking about what people claim happened, and let's look at the data. Mr. Chen, you will take me to your local operations console. We are going to pull the complete unedited system logs for this boarding pass. Then we are going to review the unedited time-stamped CCTV footage from this gate, which my office has already requested be preserved. Are we clear?" David Chen could only nod, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked at Karen with an expression of utter betrayal and fury. She had not brought him a simple problem. She had brought him an apocalypse. "And Miss Preston," Marcus said, turning his piercing gaze on her, "you will not scan another ticket. You will not speak to another passenger. You will not touch any system. You will stand right here and wait for us. Your workday is over." Without waiting for a response, Marcus gestured for David Chen to lead the way. The supervisor, now looking like a man being led to the gallows, turned and began to walk briskly away from the gate, his posture a portrait of defeat. Marcus paused and walked over to his daughter. The official mask fell away for a moment, and he was just a father. He put a hand on her shoulder. "You okay, Z-Bug?" he asked softly. Zara looked from the shell-shocked face of Karen Preston to the retreating back of the supervisor, then up at her dad. A single tear, one of anger and vindication, finally escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She nodded, unable to speak. "Good," he said, giving her shoulder a firm squeeze. "It's almost over." He then turned and followed David Chen, leaving Karen Preston standing alone at the podium. The long line of passengers stared at her, no longer with impatience, but with a mixture of awe and morbid curiosity. She was a statue of hubris, standing amidst the ruins of her own making, waiting for the inevitable judgment to fall. The walk to the Global Voyager Station operations room was silent and fraught with tension. David Chen led the way, his stride no longer harried but stiff, like a man marching into a court-martial. Marcus followed a few paces behind, his calm demeanor now more menacing than any outburst could ever be. The operations room was a cramped, chaotic space filled with monitors displaying flight statuses, weather patterns, and crew schedules. A frazzled-looking operations manager looked up as they entered, his expression turning to confusion as he saw his supervisor's ashen face. "David, what's going on? E14 just called, said boarding has stopped." David ignored him. He went to a terminal and his hands, which were visibly trembling, flew across the keyboard. He was a man desperately searching for an exit from a burning building. Perhaps the ticket really was flawed. Perhaps there was a system glitch, a forgotten note, anything he could use to mitigate the disaster. "Passenger name Mallory, Zara," he mumbled, typing. The record flashed onto the screen instantly. Marcus stepped closer to read it over David's shoulder. The last line was the final nail in the coffin. The ticket hadn't been purchased by Zara or her parents directly. It had been booked through the FAA's own corporate travel portal, a courtesy Marcus extended to his family for official or celebratory travel, using his own accumulated personal travel funds within the system. It was an ironclad, top-tier booking that was as legitimate as the plane itself. David Chen made a small, strangled sound in the back of his throat. He stared at the screen, at the words, Federal Aviation Administration, as if they were a death sentence. He now understood that this wasn't just the deputy administrator on a personal crusade. The FAA itself was the aggrieved customer. "Now let's check the gate scan logs for this ticket number," Marcus said, his voice flat. David's fingers, now clumsy with dread, typed in another series of commands. The log appeared. There were successful scan entries for every other first-class passenger. For Zara Mallory's ticket number, there was nothing. No scan attempt, no rejection error, no activity whatsoever. It was digital proof that Karen Preston's primary claim, that the ticket had failed to scan, was a complete and utter fabrication. "So," Marcus said, the single word hanging in the air like a judge's gavel. "No scan attempt, no system error, just a denial. Now let's see the video." The operations manager, who had been watching this unfold with growing horror, quickly pulled up the CCTV feed for Gate E14. They rewound it to the point where Zara approached the podium. The silent video was damning. It showed Zara smiling politely. It showed Karen's dismissive wave. It showed Zara speaking calmly, gesturing to her phone. It showed Karen's increasingly agitated state and Zara's steadfast but in no way belligerent posture. It showed Karen making the final dismissive gesture and Zara walking away, her shoulders slumped in humiliation. There was no disruption. There was no aggression. There was only a quiet, brutal exercise of undeserved power. The video confirmed everything. It exposed every lie. David Chen leaned back in his chair, a broken man. I am so sorry, Mr. Mallory. This is inexcusable." "Yes, it is," Marcus replied coolly. "Get your airline station manager down here now." While David made the panicked call, Marcus stepped out of the room and dialed his own number. "Jim, it's Marcus. I need you to initiate a formal DOT complaint against Global Voyager Airlines for a potential violation of 14 CFR Part 382, specifically regarding discriminatory practices in passenger processing, and open a corresponding FAA investigation into their customer service training protocols and complaint resolution history, starting with the Atlanta hub. I want a full audit. I want to see every single discrimination complaint filed against this airline for the past 3 years, and I want to see how they were resolved, or, as I suspect, how they were dismissed." He was no longer just a father protecting his daughter. He was a regulator who had just witnessed a systemic failure so blatant, so arrogant, that it demanded an institutional response. When the station manager, a woman named Linda Riley, rushed in, her face already pale, Marcus laid out the situation in cold, irrefutable detail. He spoke of the lie, the attempted cover-up, the systemic implications. "Miss Riley," he concluded, "your airline has a profound problem, and it is now my administration's problem. You will, of course, ensure my daughter is immediately escorted onto that aircraft and receives the service she paid for. But understand this, the consequences for Global Voyager will not end when that plane pushes back from the gate." Linda Riley's apologies were profuse and immediate. "Mr. Mallory, I am mortified. Please allow me to personally escort Dr. Mallory to the plane. We will offer her a full refund, a voucher for future travel, an upgrade to our highest medallion status." Marcus held up a hand. "That's between you and my daughter. My concern is ensuring this doesn't happen to the next person who doesn't have me on speed dial." He turned and left the operations room. Back at the gate, the scene was one of suspended animation. The remaining passengers were still waiting, sensing the gravity of the drama that had unfolded. Karen Preston was still standing by the podium, now being watched over by another airline employee. Her face was a blank mask of shock. Marcus went straight to Zara. He took her by the arm and guided her towards the jet bridge, where Linda Riley was now waiting, her face a rictus of pained apology. "Dr. Mallory," Linda began, "I cannot express how sorry I am for what you just experienced. It was unprofessional, unacceptable, and it will be dealt with in the severest terms." Zara just looked at her, her eyes weary. "Thank you." As they walked down the jet bridge, Zara finally turned to her father. "Dad, you didn't have to—" "Yes, Z," he said, his voice softening completely. "I did. For you and for everyone else." When Zara stepped onto the plane, the atmosphere was different. The lead flight attendant, clearly having been radioed, greeted her with an almost comically wide-eyed, deferential smile. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Mallory. Please let me show you to your seat. Can I get you a pre-departure glass of champagne? Some water? Anything at all?" As Zara settled into the plush leather of seat 3A, she looked out the window. She saw Karen Preston being quietly escorted away from the gate by Linda Riley and an airport security officer. It wasn't a dramatic arrest, but it was a walk of shame. Her gatekeeper status revoked, her authority evaporated. The plane door closed and the aircraft began to push back. Zara leaned her head against the cool window, the emotions of the last hour washing over her. She felt a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a sliver of something else, a grim, hard-won vindication. The immediate reckoning had been swift and decisive, but as the plane sped down the runway and lifted into the Georgia sky, she had a feeling the true consequences, the hard karma, had only just begun to unfold on the ground below. In the days and weeks that followed, the incident at Gate E14 ceased to be a personal matter and metastasized into a corporate and regulatory crisis for Global Voyager Airlines. Marcus Mallory was true to his word. The consequences did not end when Flight 22 departed. In fact, that departure was merely the opening shot in a war that Global Voyager was completely unprepared to fight. The first domino to fall was, predictably, Karen Preston. She was suspended immediately, and after a perfunctory internal investigation that consisted primarily of viewing the damning CCTV footage and system logs, she was terminated for gross misconduct and violation of company policy and federal regulations. Desperate and defiant, Karen hired a lawyer and filed a wrongful termination lawsuit. Her claim was that she was a diligent employee being made a scapegoat for a powerful government official throwing his weight around. The lawsuit was her final, fatal miscalculation. It moved the affair from the private domain of a corporate HR file into the public record. Global Voyager's legal team, forced into discovery, had to produce the video. The silent, grainy footage of her disdainful looks, her refusal to scan the ticket, and Zara's calm demeanor was played in a deposition. Her own lies, transcribed from her conversation with David Chen and Marcus Mallory, were read back to her. The lawsuit was summarily dismissed, with the judge making a pointed remark about the frivolous nature of the claim. Karen Preston was not only unemployed, she was now unemployable. Her name was blacklisted throughout the tightly knit airline industry, a permanent pariah. The next domino was David Chen, the supervisor. The FAA audit that Marcus had ordered began its work with relentless efficiency. Investigators, armed with subpoenas and the full authority of the federal government, descended on the Atlanta hub. They weren't just looking for one bad apple, they were inspecting the entire orchard. They started with the formal complaint history. As Marcus had suspected, they unearthed a disturbing pattern. Over the previous 3 years, more than 24 formal discrimination complaints had been filed by passengers at the Atlanta hub. These complaints, primarily from minority travelers, detailed strikingly similar experiences: being unfairly singled out for extra scrutiny, being accused of holding fraudulent tickets, or being treated with open hostility by gate staff. And at the bottom of nearly every single closure report was the signature of David Chen. His method was consistent. He would interview the employee, who would invariably claim the passenger was disruptive or non-compliant. He would then close the case with the finding, customer service issue, employee followed protocol. He had systematically buried a mountain of evidence, creating a culture where employees like Karen Preston felt not only safe, but empowered to act on their biases. He hadn't just failed to manage his team, he had actively enabled them. He was fired not just for his role in the Zara Mallory incident, but for his systemic failure of oversight and his role in fostering a discriminatory environment. But Marcus Mallory's investigation had a much larger target than 2 disgruntled employees. He was aiming for the system itself. The audit team dug deeper, pulling training manuals, internal communications, and corporate policy documents. They found that Global Voyager's customer service training was woefully inadequate. It focused almost exclusively on operational efficiency, boarding times, on-time departures, and ancillary revenue, with only a single generic PowerPoint slide on diversity and inclusion. There were no robust protocols for de-escalation, no meaningful training on implicit bias, and no clear, impartial process for a passenger to appeal a gate agent's decision in real time. The final report from the FAA's Office of Civil Rights landed on the CEO of Global Voyager's desk like a bomb. It was a scathing, multi-hundred-page indictment of the airline's culture. It detailed, in excruciating and legally actionable detail, a pattern of behavior that constituted a systemic violation of the Air Carrier Access Act and other federal anti-discrimination statutes. The cascade of karma was now about to hit the company's bottom line. Armed with the FAA report, the U.S. Department of Transportation, DOT, moved in. They bypassed a warning and went straight for the jugular. Global Voyager Airlines was hit with a staggering fine, $2.5 million. It was one of the largest penalties ever levied against an airline for discriminatory practices. The press release from the DOT was brutal, explicitly referencing a pattern of conduct, particularly at its Atlanta hub, that resulted in the repeated mistreatment of passengers based on their race. The financial hit was bad, but the reputational damage was catastrophic. The story, now backed by a federal investigation and a massive fine, was picked up by national news outlets. The narrative was irresistible. A powerful gate agent's racist actions exposed by the victim's father, who just happened to be the head of aviation safety. It was a story of hubris and comeuppance that played out on the nightly news and went viral across social media. Global Voyager's stock price took a significant hit. Passengers, particularly minority travelers, began publicly boycotting the airline. The final, and perhaps most painful piece of karma was the consent decree. To avoid further legal action and even more crippling fines, Global Voyager was forced to sign a legally binding agreement with the FAA and the DOT. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a mandate. The consent decree required a complete top-to-bottom overhaul of their entire customer service and gate agent training program nationwide. The new curriculum, which had to be designed by outside experts and approved by the FAA's Office of Civil Rights, would heavily focus on implicit bias, de-escalation techniques, and cultural sensitivity. Furthermore, the airline was required to implement a new, transparent complaint resolution system. A passenger accused of having a fraudulent ticket or being disruptive at the gate now had the right to an immediate, on-the-spot review by a specially trained, centrally located supervisor via video call, removing the final authority from the lone gate agent. And the most humiliating part for the airline. For the next 5 years, they would be subject to quarterly audits and spot checks by the FAA to ensure compliance. The federal government would be embedded in their operations, watching their every move. The reign of gatekeepers like Karen Preston was officially over, dismantled and replaced by a system of accountability, all because of what happened during 10 minutes of boarding at Gate E14. 6 months later, the London rain tapped a gentle, rhythmic beat against the window of Zara's small flat in South Kensington. The city's gray sky was a stark contrast to the vibrant, chaotic energy of Atlanta, a place that now felt a world away. Zara was thriving. Her postdoctoral research at Imperial College was challenging and exhilarating. She was building a new life, one defined by her work and her future, not by the 10 minutes of humiliation that had threatened to define her past. The incident still lingered in her mind, not as a raw wound, but as a scar that served as a reminder. It had been about so much more than a first-class seat. It had been about dignity. It was about the exhausting, lifelong burden of having to constantly prove your worth, your legitimacy, your very presence in spaces where others take their belonging for an absolute given. She had won that day, but she was acutely aware of how easily the outcome could have been different. What if her father had been a plumber, a teacher, or a doctor instead of the deputy administrator of the FAA? The injustice would have been the same, but the outcome would have been a dismissed complaint and a bitter memory. This thought no longer filled her with anger, but with a sober sense of responsibility. Her privilege that day wasn't the expensive seat, but her access to a power that could enforce fairness. She was on a video call with her father, the connection crackling slightly across the Atlantic. Marcus looked tired, but there was a deep-set satisfaction in his eyes that she hadn't seen in a long time. "How's the research, Z-Bug?" he asked, the familiar pet name a comforting anchor to home. "It's good, Dad. We're making some real progress on the CRISPR delivery system," she said before smiling. "But I have a feeling you didn't call to talk about gene editing." He chuckled, a low, warm rumble. He held up a thick, bound document to his screen. The cover was emblazoned with the Global Voyager Airlines logo. The title read, "The Pathway Program, a new standard in customer service and inclusivity training." "The final version of their new training manual," he said. "Approved by my office this morning. It's being rolled out to all 15,000 of their customer-facing employees, starting next week." Zara knew what this document represented. It was the fruit of the consent decree, the tangible result of the whole ordeal. It was policy born from pain. Does it have anything good in it?" she asked tentatively. "It's a revolution for them," Marcus said, his voice laced with pride. "Hours of mandatory training on implicit bias, role-playing scenarios based on real-life complaints, including a very specific one about a young black woman with a valid first-class ticket. A new rule called the third-party verification protocol for any disputed travel document. They can't just make a call on their own anymore." He paused, a rare small smile playing on his lips. "Internally, the scuttlebutt is that the employees have given the new protocol a nickname. They're calling it the Mallory Accord." Zara felt a lump form in her throat. The Mallory Accord. It wasn't just punishment. It was a permanent systemic change. It was a shield that would now, hopefully, protect countless others. The karma hadn't just been hard. It had been constructive. That's really something, Dad," she said softly. What Karen Preston and David Chen failed to understand, Marcus reflected, looking not at Zara but at a point beyond his screen, is that the rules of the sky are built on trust. Passengers have to trust the pilots, the mechanics, the air traffic controllers, and airlines must trust their passengers. They broke that trust. Not just with you, Z. They broke it with the public. All we did was hold them accountable to the standards they were supposed to be upholding all along. He finally looked back at her, his expression serious but full of love. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, Zara. No one should ever be made to feel the way you did." "I know, Dad," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm glad you were there to do something about it. Not just for me, for everyone." After they hung up, Zara looked back out at the London rain. The city lights were beginning to shimmer to life in the twilight. The humiliation of that day at Gate E14 had been a bitter pill, but the outcome was a legacy. A father's love, forged into a federal mandate. An act of personal prejudice, transformed into a lesson in public accountability. An accord named for her family that would ripple through the aviation industry for years to come, quietly making the skies just a little bit fairer for everyone. And in that, she found a sense of peace that was more comforting than any first-class seat could ever be. That single moment of prejudice at Gate E14 set off a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. It's a powerful reminder that the systems we live in are only as fair as the people who run them, and that true change often requires someone with the power and the will to demand it. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reform. The Mallory Accord became a quiet legend in the industry, a testament to the fact that accountability can and should have a ripple effect that protects everyone. What did you think of Karen's downfall and the systemic changes that followed? Was the karma deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next story of drama and hard-hitting karma. What does it take for a black woman to be heard? Is it her credentials, her calm, reasoned plea, Or does it take a near-death experience at 35,000 feet to make people listen? This is the story of Dr. Imani Carter, a brilliant immunologist whose life-threatening allergy was dismissed as an inconvenience. It's the story of a flight attendant, Heather Vance, whose casual disregard set off a catastrophic chain of events. But this isn't just about a bag of peanuts. This is the story of how one woman's fight for her life exposed a rot so deep it threatened to bring an entire billion-dollar airline crashing down to Earth. What happened on Aura Airlines Flight 812 from New York to London didn't just end in an emergency landing. It sparked a firestorm that would challenge corporate power and change the rules of air travel forever. Dr. Imani Carter was a woman of precision. As a pediatric immunologist at one of New York's most prestigious hospitals, her life revolved around details, protocols, and the infinitesimal traces of proteins that could mean the difference between life and death for her young patients. She understood anaphylaxis not as a frightening concept, but as a cascade of cellular warfare, a violent, lightning-fast betrayal by one's own body. She had dedicated her career to preventing it in others, and she was meticulously disciplined in managing it for herself. Her own allergy was to peanuts, a severe airborne sensitive condition she'd managed since childhood. It was a vulnerability she refused to let define her, but one she never, ever underestimated. On the evening of October 26, 2024, Dr. Carter was headed to London to present her groundbreaking research at the World Allergy Organization conference. This was the culmination of 3 years of relentless work. For her, Aura Airlines Flight 812 was not just a transatlantic crossing. It was a vessel carrying her to a career-defining moment. Her protocol was unwavering. She booked her ticket over the phone, explicitly stating her severe airborne allergy and ensuring a note was placed in her file. At JFK's Terminal 4, she approached the gate agent, a cheerful young man named David. "Hi there," Imani said, offering a warm but serious smile. "I'm Dr. Imani Carter in seat 12A. I just wanted to personally confirm the note on my file regarding a severe airborne peanut allergy. It's critical that no peanuts or peanut products are served in the cabin, especially around me." David tapped at his keyboard. "Yep, I see it right here, Dr. Carter. Severe allergy. No problem. I'll make sure to give the cabin crew a heads up before boarding." Imani felt a familiar, small knot of tension ease. The first checkpoint was passed. Once on board the sleek, modern Boeing 787 Dreamliner, she settled into her business class seat. A flight attendant with a kind face named Maria came by to offer pre-departure beverages. "Excuse me," Imani said, catching her eye. "I'm the passenger with the severe airborne peanut allergy. I spoke to the gate agent, but I always like to inform the cabin crew directly. It is truly a life-threatening situation for me." Maria's expression was one of genuine concern. "Of course. Thank you so much for telling me. I'll make the announcement for the whole cabin before we serve snacks, and I'll personally ensure our service carts are clear of any peanut products. Don't you worry." The second checkpoint. The knot loosened further. Imani allowed herself to relax, pulling out her presentation notes for a final review. The plane took off smoothly, a silver giant climbing into the dark, star-pricked canvas of the night sky. The hum of the engines was a soothing balm. An hour into the flight, the dinner service began. Maria had been true to her word, discreetly serving the passengers in the rows ahead of and behind Imani first, confirming their meal choices quietly. Everything was going perfectly. Then, Maria's shift in the forward cabin ended. Her replacement was a woman named Heather Vance. Heather moved with an air of practiced, almost weary authority. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, and her movements were efficient to the point of being curt. She began the second snack and drink service from the front of the cabin, working her way back. As the cart drew nearer, Imani felt a primal jolt of anxiety. The familiar protocol was broken. This new flight attendant hadn't been briefed. The cart stopped at the row in front of her. Imani heard Heather's voice, clear and professionally cheerful. "And for you, sir, a drink? We have some lovely warm mixed nuts as well. Ice water flooded Imani's veins. Mixed nuts, the generic term that almost always included peanuts. She unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, just as Heather turned to her row. "Excuse me," Imani said, her voice steady but firm. "I'm sorry, but you can't serve those." Heather paused, her perfectly manicured hand hovering over the silver bowl of nuts. She looked Imani up and down, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "I'm sorry. I have a severe life-threatening airborne peanut allergy," Imani explained, keeping her voice low to avoid alarming other passengers. The gate agent and the previous flight attendant were both aware. There are supposed to be no peanuts served on this flight, or at the very least, not in this cabin. Heather's smile became a thin, brittle line. "Ma'am, these are just mixed nuts. It's a standard snack for our business class passengers." "And mixed nuts almost always contain peanuts," Imani countered, her heart starting to beat faster. "The dust, the oils in the air from people opening the packets. It's enough to trigger anaphylaxis for me. This isn't a preference. It's a medical emergency waiting to happen." She was a doctor. She knew exactly what would unfold inside her body. The hives, the swelling tongue, the constricted airway, the terror. Heather let out a small, barely audible sigh. It was a sound of profound dismissal. "We can't change our entire service for one person's dietary needs. If you have an allergy, you should have been prepared." The condescension was a physical blow. "Dietary needs? This isn't a gluten-free choice. This could kill me," Imani said, her voice rising slightly. "I was prepared. I informed the airline twice. Your colleague Maria handled it perfectly. I just need you to follow the same protocol." A man in the seat across the aisle who had been listening chimed in. "She's right. Just don't serve the nuts. What's the big deal?" Heather shot him a withering look before turning her gaze back to Imani. It was a look Imani had seen before, a look that questioned, that diminished, that implied she was being dramatic, difficult, a look that black women knew all too well. "I'm the lead flight attendant in this cabin," Heather said, her voice dropping to a low, authoritative hush. "I know the regulations. We are not required to create a peanut-free zone. I will not deprive all of our paying customers of a snack because of an unverified claim." The phrase unverified claim hung in the air, thick with insinuation. As if Imani, a doctor of immunology, was lying. Imani was stunned into silence for a second. The sheer arrogance was breathtaking. "Please," she said, her voice now pleading, "I am begging you, do not open those nuts." Heather picked up a packet of the warm nuts, tore it open with a flourish, and poured them into a small white ramekin. The gesture was a deliberate act of defiance. She handed them to the man in seat 11B. "Enjoy, sir," she said, her eyes locked on Imani. The man, now looking deeply uncomfortable, hesitated. "You know what, I'm good, thanks." But it was too late. The air changed. For most, it was nothing, the faintest scent of roasted salt. For Imani, it was a declaration of war. A microscopic, invisible army of proteins had been launched into her pressurized, recycled airspace. It started as a tingle on her lips. Then a fiery itch exploded in her palms. She looked down and saw angry red welts blooming on her skin. Hives. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her shock. She fumbled in her handbag for her purse, her fingers suddenly clumsy. Inside was her EpiPen, her lifeline. A cough escaped her lips, then another. It wasn't a normal cough. It was a tight, barking sound. Her airway was constricting. Her throat felt like it was being squeezed by an invisible hand. Wheezing started in her chest, a high-pitched, desperate whistle. She could feel the eyes of other passengers on her. The man across the aisle stood up. "My God, she's having a reaction. Get a doctor." "I am a doctor," Imani gasped, the words barely escaping her swollen throat. She ripped the EpiPen from its case. She knew the protocol by heart. Blue to the sky, orange to the thigh. She jammed the needle into her leg with all her might, through the fabric of her trousers. A click confirmed the dose of epinephrine was delivered. a shot of pure adrenaline to fight the allergic cascade. But the relief didn't come. The reaction was too fast, too violent. This was a bad one. The wheezing grew louder. Black spots danced in her vision. The recycled air of the cabin felt as thin as the stratosphere. Heather Vance stood frozen by her cart, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. The ramekin of nuts sat there, a mundane object that had become a weapon. Maria, the first flight attendant, rushed back into the cabin, alerted by the commotion. "What happened?" she cried, her eyes wide with fear as she saw Imani gasping for air. "Call the captain. Tell him we have a medical emergency. Anaphylactic shock," the man from across the aisle yelled. "We need to land, now." Imani slumped in her seat, fighting for every breath. The world was narrowing to a dark tunnel. Her last coherent thought wasn't for her career or the conference in London. It was a simple, terrifying question that echoed in the roaring of her own blood. Why wouldn't she listen? The captain's voice, grave and urgent, crackled over the intercom. The Silver Dreamliner, once a vessel of ambition and dreams, began a steep emergency descent out of the night sky. Its destination no longer London, but the nearest strip of land that could save a woman's life. The seeds of chaos, sown by a single act of disregard, were beginning to sprout. The jarring thump of the landing gear on the tarmac of Gander International Airport in Newfoundland was the sound of Imani Carter's survival. Paramedics stormed the plane before the engines had fully spooled down, a whirlwind of professional urgency that stood in stark contrast to the casual negligence that had put her there. Imani was a blur of IV lines, oxygen masks, and the concerned faces of Canadian EMTs. She was whisked away to the James Peyton Memorial Hospital, a small, competent facility not accustomed to dealing with the fallout of international airline incidents. As they worked to stabilize her, the lingering effects of the epinephrine left her trembling uncontrollably, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The terror had subsided, replaced by a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and a cold, simmering rage. She had spent hours in the emergency room, being monitored, rehydrated, and given steroids to quell the inflammatory storm still raging in her system. Her London conference was a distant, shattered dream. Her meticulously planned week was now an indefinite stay in a foreign town, hooked up to machines, all because she had not been believed. The first contact from Aura Airlines came nearly 12 hours later. It wasn't a call from a high-level executive or even a passenger care specialist. It was a standardized email that landed in her inbox with an offensively cheerful subject line. "We're sorry your travel plans were disrupted." The email was a masterpiece of corporate non-apology. It spoke of an unforeseen medical incident and a diversion for the safety and comfort of all on board. It offered her a $300 travel voucher for her inconvenience. Imani stared at the screen, her blood running cold. Inconvenience? She had nearly died. She had been medically suffocated at 35,000 feet. Her throat had closed, her body had erupted in hives, and she had been forced to stab herself with a needle full of adrenaline while strangers looked on in horror. And Aura Airlines was calling it an inconvenience. The $300 voucher felt less like an apology and more like a gag order, a pittance to make the problem go away. The email didn't mention an allergy, it didn't mention peanuts, and it certainly didn't mention the name Heather Vance. It was as if the airline had already scrubbed the specifics, replacing the terrifying reality with bland, legally sanitized jargon. That was the moment the patient, the victim, disappeared, and Dr. Imani Carter, the fighter, was born. The rage, which had been simmering, now crystallized into something hard and clear: resolve. This was not about inconvenience. This was about negligence. It was about a systemic failure that treated a human life as a liability to be managed. And it was about the quiet, insidious bias that had allowed Heather Vance to look at a black doctor, a specialist in the very field of her affliction, and see not an expert on her own condition, but a troublemaker. From her hospital bed, she began her work. Her mind, trained for precision and documentation, went into overdrive. She wrote down every single detail she could remember. The conversation with the gate agent, David. The reassuring words from the first flight attendant, Maria. The exact, dismissive, and condescending dialogue with Heather Vance. She noted the names of the passengers who had tried to help her, the timeline of her symptoms, the terror she felt. She took pictures of the IV in her arm and the lingering red blotches on her skin. She was building a case, brick by meticulous brick. When she was finally discharged 2 days later, Aura Airlines put her up in a sterile airport hotel in Gander. They rebooked her on a flight to London, as if she could simply pick up where she left off. Imani canceled the flight. Her conference was over, but her new mission was just beginning. She flew back to New York, not in defeat, but armed for battle. The first person she called wasn't a friend or a family member. It was a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. She researched for days, looking for someone who understood not just personal injury, but the complex intersection of corporate negligence and civil rights. She found Marcus Thorne. Marcus Thorne was a legal shark with a conscience. A partner at a boutique Manhattan law firm, he had made his name taking on giants, slumlord real estate developers, discriminatory tech companies, and corrupt city departments. He was known for his razor-sharp courtroom presence and his deep, unwavering belief that the law was a tool for the powerless. His office, overlooking the gray canyons of the financial district, was a war room for David and Goliath battles. When Imani sat down in his office, she presented her story not with tears or anger, but with the cold, hard precision of a medical brief. She laid out her documented timeline, the email from Aura, the photos. Marcus listened, his steepled fingers hiding his mouth, his eyes never leaving hers. He'd heard hundreds of stories of corporate malfeasance, but this one was different. It was the confluence of factors, the blatant disregard for a stated medical need, the credentials of the victim making her claim unimpeachable, the airline's insulting response, and the undeniable though subtle racial undertones of the dismissal. "They didn't see a doctor," Marcus said, his voice a low rumble when she finished. "They saw a black woman they could dismiss. They figured you'd be scared or tired or grateful to be alive, and you'd take the voucher and go away." "They figured wrong," Imani said. "Dr. Carter," Marcus said, leaning forward, "this isn't just a personal injury claim. A simple negligence suit gets you a settlement. They'll pay up. Heather Vance might get retrained or even fired, and everything goes back to the way it was. But that email," he pointed to the printout on his desk, "this tells me everything. Their protocol isn't to protect passengers, it's to protect themselves from passengers. This is systemic. We're not just going after one flight attendant. We're going after the entire rotten culture of Aura Airlines." He stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the city. "They tried to silence you for $300. We're going to make them pay in a currency they truly understand: public opinion and federal oversight. We're going to file a lawsuit so damning and so public that every person with an allergy, every parent of an allergic child will think twice before booking a ticket with them. We're going to make your name synonymous with passenger rights." The first step was a formal letter of complaint to the Department of Transportation and a demand letter to Aura Airlines, laying out their case in excruciating detail. It was ignored for a week, then met with a response from Aura's legal department. A curt, formal letter denying any wrongdoing and stating that Flight Attendant Vance had acted within the bounds of company policy. Company policy. That was the phrase that sealed their fate. "They've just handed us the gun," Marcus said with a grim smile. "Now we let the world know they're about to pull the trigger on themselves." He connected Imani with a trusted journalist at a major online news outlet, known for its investigative work. The story, "Doctor nearly dies from allergy after flight attendant ignores pleas, airline offers $300 voucher," was published on a Tuesday morning. By noon it was viral. The hashtag #AuraAllergyFail exploded on Twitter. Parents of children with allergies shared the story with fury. Fellow doctors and medical professionals expressed their outrage at the dismissal of a colleague. Black writers and activists highlighted the racial dynamics of Imani being disbelieved. A passenger from Flight 812, the man from across the aisle, posted his own account corroborating every detail of Imani's story, describing Heather Vance's appalling arrogance. Aura Airlines, which had hoped to suffocate the story with corporate silence, suddenly found itself in the middle of a digital inferno. Their carefully crafted brand image of modern, caring service was being torched in real time. The story of Flight 812 was no longer a contained incident. It was a public referendum on the soul of the airline, and the verdict was coming in, loud and clear. The public relations crisis at Aura Airlines was immediate and brutal. Their social media channels, usually a curated stream of picturesque destinations and happy travelers, became a toxic wasteland of angry comments and boycott threats. The stock price, a sensitive barometer of public confidence, wobbled and then began a steady, sickening slide. Inside the gleaming corporate headquarters of Aura Airlines in Dallas, Texas, CEO Richard Sterling was in damage control mode. Sterling was a man forged in the crucible of shareholder meetings and quarterly reports. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and possessed a brand of charisma that worked well on investors but felt hollow up close. He saw the world not in terms of people, but in data points, risks, and liabilities. The Imani Carter situation was, in his mind, a PR fire to be extinguished, not a systemic wrong to be righted. In an emergency executive meeting, the mood was tense. "What is our exposure here?" Sterling demanded, pacing in front of a panoramic window. "Legally, our policy gives flight attendants discretion on in-flight service," said Eleanor Vance, the head of the legal department, and in a twist of corporate nepotism, Heather Vance's aunt, a fact known only to a select few. "We maintain that our crew member acted within those guidelines. We can argue Dr. Carter's allergy was unusually severe, an outlier." "The public doesn't care about guidelines, Eleanor," snapped Chloe Fung, the VP of Communications. "They see a story about a sick black doctor being ignored and then insulted with a voucher. Optically, it's a Category 5 disaster. #Aura allergy fail has been tweeted over 2 million times. We're the #1 trending topic for all the wrong reasons." "So what's the play?" Sterling asked. "We issue a full-throated apology. We fire the flight attendant, Heather Vance. We make a public show of it. We announce a full review of our allergy policies. We offer Dr. Carter a substantial confidential settlement to make this go away," Chloe said, ticking off the points on her fingers. Eleanor Vance stiffened. "Firing Heather without a full internal investigation, while we are claiming she followed policy, will gut our case if this goes to court. It's an admission of guilt." "We're already guilty in the court of public opinion," Chloe shot back. "We have to sacrifice the flight attendant. She's the face of the problem." Sterling held up a hand. "No, not yet. Firing her makes us look weak and validates every claim. We stand by our employee. We stand by our policy. We release a statement about a thorough investigation and the safety of our passengers being our highest priority. Standard procedure. This will die down in a few news cycles." It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Sterling, blinded by arrogance and insulated by layers of corporate yes-men, fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the firestorm. He underestimated Dr. Imani Carter's resolve, Marcus Thorne's skill, and the power of a story that resonated with millions. Back in New York, Marcus Thorne was launching the discovery phase of the lawsuit. He filed sweeping requests for documents. Aura's internal training manuals on medical emergencies and allergies, all passenger complaints filed against Heather Vance, and every internal email and memo related to Flight 812 and the Imani Carter incident. Aura's legal team, led by Eleanor Vance, responded by stonewalling. They buried Marcus's firm in thousands of pages of irrelevant documents, redacting key information, and claiming other documents were protected by corporate privilege. It was a classic delay tactic, but Marcus had an ace up his sleeve. The viral story had shaken more than just the public. It had rattled someone on the inside. One evening, an anonymous email landed in Marcus's inbox. The sender ID was encrypted, The message brief and chilling. You're being lied to. Heather Vance has at least 4 prior official complaints for dismissive behavior, 2 involving passenger medical needs. They were all buried. Search for internal file code HR Discretionary Action Vance H 2022-2024. They also have a training module, Liability Mitigation in Passenger Interactions, which teaches crew to avoid using language that admits fault. They're not trying to protect passengers. They're training them to protect the stock price. This goes all the way to the top. Look for Richard Sterling's memos from last year's budget meeting regarding cost optimization of passenger-specific service accommodations. It was the smoking gun, a roadmap to the rot. The whistleblower's email gave Marcus the specific search terms he needed. He filed a motion to compel, citing the anonymous tip as evidence that Aura was deliberately withholding critical documents. Faced with the threat of sanctions from a judge for hiding evidence, Eleanor Vance had no choice but to produce the files. They were damning. The personnel file for Heather Vance was a horror show. There was a complaint from an elderly man who needed his oxygen tank, whom she had treated as an inconvenience. There was a complaint from a mother whose diabetic child needed to eat at a specific time, a request Heather had ignored, causing a hypoglycemic scare. In each case, her Aunt Eleanor had ensured the complaint was resolved with a minimal write-up and a voucher sent to the passenger. Heather Vance wasn't just a negligent employee. She was a serial liability, protected by nepotism. The training module, Liability Mitigation, was even worse. It included flowcharts on how to handle passenger complaints, with a clear emphasis on de-escalation through non-committal language and avoiding any phrase that could be interpreted as an apology or admission of fault. It was a corporate manual for gaslighting, but the real bombshell was Richard Sterling's memo. In a discussion about the cost of accommodating special meal requests and other needs, he had written the line that would come to haunt him. While we must adhere to basic federal mandates, we must empower our crew to differentiate between genuine medical necessities and passenger preferences. Every deviation from standard service represents a cost. We must manage these interactions to minimize operational drag and protect our margins. The ultimate goal is to balance perceived customer care with the fiscal reality of our business. Marcus read the line aloud in his office. He put a price tag on a human life, and he called it operational drag. The tide had turned. Marcus's team began reaching out to the other complainants from Heather Vance's file. 2 of them, emboldened by Imani's public stand, agreed to join the lawsuit, turning it into a potential class action case. The story was no longer about a single incident. It was about a clear, documented pattern of dangerous neglect. Aura Airlines, realizing their strategy of stonewalling had backfired spectacularly, finally did what Chloe Fung had suggested weeks earlier. They fired Heather Vance, issuing a public statement that new information had come to light and that she had failed to uphold the high standards of care expected by the airline. It was too little, too late. For Heather, it was a brutal betrayal. She had been told she was following policy, protected by her powerful aunt. Now she was being thrown to the wolves to save the very executives who had fostered the culture of dismissal. She felt scapegoated and furious. For the public, it looked like a desperate, cynical move. Firing her now only confirmed that they knew she was a problem all along. The pressure mounted. The FAA announced it was opening its own formal investigation into Aura's training and safety protocols. Members of Congress, smelling blood in the water and an opportunity for some good press, began calling for hearings on the Passenger Bill of Rights. Richard Sterling, who had believed he could manage the narrative, had lost complete control. The story was no longer his to write. He was now just a character in Imani Carter's story, the arrogant corporate villain about to face his reckoning. The stage was set for the final act, the depositions that would strip away the corporate veil and expose the truth to the world. The deposition room was a sterile, soulless space designed to strip away emotion and reduce human drama to a transcript. But for Aura Airlines, it would become a slaughterhouse. Marcus Thorne had orchestrated the depositions with a strategist's precision. First, the fallen soldier, then the corporate protector, then the king himself. Heather Vance was first. No longer in her crisp uniform, she looked smaller, diminished. Her anger at being fired warred with her fear of the legal proceedings. Marcus began gently, establishing the facts of the flight, her years of service, her understanding of the rules. Then, he moved in for the kill. Ms. Vance, you stated that you did not believe Dr. Carter's claim was verified. What training have you received from Aura Airlines to differentiate a verified medical claim from an unverified one at 35,000 feet? We are trained to use our judgment, Heather began, reciting a line she'd been taught. And what in your medical background gave you the expertise to override the explicit warning of a passenger who identified herself as a doctor specializing in immunology? Heather stammered. I thought she was exaggerating to get special treatment. Why did you think that, Miss Vance? Marcus asked, his voice soft, almost curious. I don't know, she just seemed demanding. Have other passengers been demanding in your career? Yes, all the time. Can you recall the incident with Mr. Abramson in 2022, the elderly gentleman who needed assistance with his oxygen? Marcus slid a complaint file across the table. You wrote in your report that he was being unnecessarily difficult. Was he also seeking special treatment? Heather paled. That was a different situation. And the situation with the Martinez family in 2023? Marcus slid another file. A diabetic child needed a scheduled meal. You told her mother you would get to it when you could, and the child suffered a hypoglycemic event. Was that mother also being demanding? One by one, Marcus walked her through the prior complaints. The pattern became undeniable. It wasn't about protocol. It was about her personal judgment, a judgment that repeatedly dismissed the medical needs of passengers she deemed difficult. Under the relentless, methodical questioning, Heather Vance's defense crumbled into a tearful admission that she was overworked, stressed, and had made a terrible mistake. Next came her aunt, Eleanor Vance. The head of legal was composed, her answers crisp and guarded. She defended the airline's policies as robust and industry standard. So, Miss Vance, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, you reviewed these complaints against your niece over the years. Why was she never retrained or terminated? Each incident was investigated and handled according to our HR protocols, Eleanor said stiffly. Is it standard HR protocol to have the subject of the complaint's aunt oversee the investigation? The question landed like a grenade. The room fell silent. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. My professional relationship with my legal team is separate from any familial ties. So it's just a coincidence that a flight attendant with a documented pattern of endangering passengers, who happens to be your niece, was never disciplined. While Aura Airlines sent out voucher after voucher to quiet the people she endangered? Eleanor had no credible answer. The specter of nepotism and a cover-up now hung thick over the proceedings. Finally, it was Richard Sterling's turn. The CEO walked in flanked by lawyers, radiating an aura of untouchable power. He was prepared, his answers smooth and polished. He spoke of Aura's commitment to safety, their millions of satisfied customers, and how this incident was a tragic but isolated anomaly. Marcus let him talk, let him build his fortress of corporate platitudes. Then he produced the final document, the memo. Mr. Sterling, I'd like to read you a line you wrote. We must empower our crew to differentiate between genuine medical necessities and passenger preferences. The ultimate goal is to balance perceived customer care with the fiscal reality of our business. Marcus looked up from the paper. Mr. Sterling, what is the correct fiscal balance for a human life? Sterling's face went rigid. That quote is taken out of context. It's about operational efficiency. Is that what Dr. Carter's anaphylaxis was? An operational drag? Marcus pressed. When you tell your employees to weigh fiscal reality against passenger care, are you not explicitly telling them to put profits ahead of people? You didn't create a culture of safety, Mr. Sterling. You created a culture of calculated risk. You told your employees to gamble with passengers' lives to save a few dollars on snacks, and on Flight 812, your airline lost that bet. The deposition was a bloodbath. When the transcripts were leaked, an act Marcus's firm would neither confirm nor deny orchestrating, the story exploded again, this time with a focus on the corporate rot. #Aura became the new trending hashtag. The fallout was apocalyptic for Aura Airlines. Their stock price, which had been sliding, now plummeted off a cliff, wiping out over $1 billion in market value in a single week. Major corporate clients, including several Fortune 500 companies, publicly announced they were severing their travel contracts with the airline. The pilots' union issued a vote of no confidence in Richard Sterling's leadership, citing the damage to the airline's reputation and safety culture. The board of directors, facing a full-scale shareholder revolt, had no choice. Richard Sterling was fired. Eleanor Vance was forced to resign in disgrace. Facing a public relations nightmare and a lawsuit they now knew they could never win in court, Aura Airlines capitulated completely. They approached Marcus Thorne for a settlement. But Imani and Marcus held all the cards, and they weren't just asking for money. The settlement was historic. Dr. Imani Carter received a personal settlement of $22 million, one of the largest on record for a case of its kind. The other plaintiffs in the class action shared an additional $35 million pool, but the non-monetary terms were what truly constituted the grounding of the airline. Aura Airlines was forced to completely overhaul its allergy policy, making it the strictest in the industry. This included banning the sale or distribution of any peanut products on all flights and creating mandatory nut-free buffer zones around any passenger who self-identified with an airborne allergy. Fire the third-party company that designed the liability mitigation training and invest $50 million in a new, externally audited passenger empathy and safety program, designed in consultation with medical experts, including Dr. Carter. Establish a permanent, independent civilian oversight board with the power to review all passenger complaints related to medical and safety incidents. Fund a $10 million public health campaign in partnership with allergy awareness organizations about the dangers of food allergies in travel. The FAA, concluding its own investigation, fined Aura Airlines an unprecedented $185 million for systemic safety failures. The congressional hearings resulted in the drafting of the Air Carrier Passenger Safety and Dignity Act, often referred to simply as Imani's Law, which would mandate many of Aura's new policies across all U.S. airlines. Aura Airlines wasn't literally grounded in the sense that its planes stopped flying. It was something far more profound. Its identity was shattered. Its leadership was purged. Its culture was forcibly dismantled. Its finances were crippled. It was grounded from its own arrogance, its reputation in tatters, forced to rebuild from the ground up under the watchful eye of the public, the government, and the very woman it had so carelessly dismissed. Dr. Imani Carter never did make it to that conference in London, but she ended up delivering a much more important presentation. Not just to a room of her peers, but to the entire world. She had shown them the anatomy of negligence, exposed the pathology of corporate greed, and in the end discovered the cure. It wasn't just epinephrine. It was the unwavering power of a single voice that refused to be silenced. 1 year later, the world does not hold its breath after a victory. It spins on, and the headlines of yesterday become the history of today. The inferno that had consumed Aura Airlines had cooled, leaving behind a scarred but fundamentally altered landscape. The name Richard Sterling was now a cautionary tale whispered in business schools. The #HashGroundAura was an artifact of a digital revolution, and Imani's Law had been signed into effect, a permanent change to the federal code governing air travel. The dust had settled, but for the people at the heart of the storm, the echoes of Flight 812 remained, shaping their new realities in ways they never could have imagined. Dr. Imani Carter stood at a podium, not in a sterile lecture hall surrounded by fellow physicians, but in a grand ballroom in Washington, D.C. The seal of the National Passenger Rights Association was behind her. Her audience was not comprised of immunologists, but of families, activists, lawmakers, and journalists. She was still a doctor, still saw her young patients, but a new, unplanned wing had been built onto her life. She was now an advocate, a public figure, the reluctant face of a movement. The settlement had given her financial freedom, but her conscience had given her a new kind of work. "We are taught to trust the systems around us," she said, her voice calm and resonant, carrying the weight of her experience. "We trust the pilot to fly the plane, the engineer to design the wing, and the cabin crew to ensure our safety. That trust is a fragile, sacred pact. The moment that pact is broken for one of us, it is threatened for all of us." My story was never just about a peanut allergy. It was about what happens when a system values its own convenience over a person's plea for their life. She flew to Washington for the summit on a commercial flight. It was an Aura Airlines flight. The booking had been a conscious decision, a personal test. As she'd boarded, she'd watched a young mother nervously inform the gate agent about her son's severe dairy allergy. Imani had watched as the agent smiled, typed a note, and then spoke directly into his radio to the cabin crew. She watched as the lead flight attendant came to the jet bridge to personally greet the mother and son, assuring them of the new protocols. She had watched the system she had helped rebuild work. The knot of anxiety in her own stomach, a permanent resident since that night over the Atlantic, had loosened just a little. The trauma was still there, a phantom itch in her throat when she smelled roasted nuts in a public market, a jolt of adrenaline when a flight experienced turbulence. Her EpiPens, once carried in her purse, were now carried in duplicate, one in her bag, one in her coat pocket. She was forever changed. But as she looked out at the faces in the ballroom, she knew her pain had been forged into a shield for them. The transformation was complete. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a guardian. In a quiet, rain-slicked suburb of Portland, Oregon, a woman scanned a bottle of artisanal ketchup at a checkout counter. Her hair was a mousy brown, cut short. She wore a green apron, the uniform of the organic grocery store where she now worked. No one recognized her as Heather Vance. She had fled Dallas after being fired, her name and face toxic. Her Aunt Eleanor, mired in her own disgrace and legal battles, had cut her off completely. Heather had been the perfect scapegoat, the single dismissive face onto which the public could project its fury, allowing the faceless corporate entity to eventually apologize and rebrand. She had been the designated sacrifice. That night, nursing a cheap glass of wine in her small apartment, she saw Dr. Imani Carter on a news segment about Imani's law. The doctor looked poised, powerful, serene. A wave of acid resentment washed over Heather. She got everything, she thought. The money, the fame, the laws named after her. The bitterness was a familiar cloak, but underneath it something else had begun to fester, the gnawing, uncomfortable weight of truth. In the lonely silence of her new life, stripped of her uniform and her misplaced authority, she had replayed that night 1,000 times. She remembered the look on Imani's face. The fear, yes, but before that, the disbelief that she was being so casually dismissed. Heather had wielded her tiny bit of power like a weapon, not because of a specific hatred for the woman in seat 12A, but because of a deep-seated frustration with her own life, her own stalled career, her own feeling of powerlessness. Dr. Carter had simply been the nearest target. It wasn't an excuse, and it offered no comfort. She opened a laptop and began to type. It was a letter, addressed to Marcus Thorne's law firm, with the instruction to forward it to his client. It was not an apology. Her pride would not allow it. It was a confession of a sort. She wrote of the pressure from the airline to turn flights around quickly, the subtle training to view passenger requests as complaints, the feeling that she was just a cog in a machine that didn't care about her any more than it cared about the passengers. She wrote that she was wrong. She admitted she had judged Dr. Carter unfairly, that she had let her own ego dictate an action that nearly killed someone. She ended the letter with a single sentence. I am not asking for forgiveness, only that you know the story is more complicated than a villain and a hero. She printed it, put it in an envelope, but did not mail it. It sat on her kitchen counter, a tangible piece of her purgatory, a first step toward an accountability she wasn't yet brave enough to fully embrace. On Aura Airlines Flight 117 from Chicago to San Francisco, a passenger in seat 24B pressed the call button. The flight attendant who arrived was Maria, the kind attendant from Imani's original flight. In the past year, her competence and empathy had been recognized. She was now a lead flight attendant and a certified onboard safety trainer. "Hi, how can I help?" Maria asked warmly. "I'm so sorry to be a bother," the passenger said nervously, "but my daughter in 24A has a severe allergy to tree nuts. It's our first time flying since her diagnosis." Maria knelt so she was at eye level with the mother and her young daughter. "It is never a bother," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you for telling us. Our entire airline is prepared for this." She spoke to the girl. "What's your name?" "Sophie," the girl whispered. "Well, Sophie, we're going to take very good care of you." Maria stood and spoke to the cabin. Her voice was not the hurried, half-intelligible mumble of pre-flight announcements. It was deliberate and serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, a brief but important announcement. We have a young passenger on board with a life-threatening airborne allergy to tree nuts. For her safety, we will not be serving any products containing nuts on this flight. We also ask that you please refrain from consuming any nut products you may have brought with you. We know this is an inconvenience for some, but your cooperation could save a life. Thank you for your understanding and for helping us make this a safe flight for everyone." A quiet murmur of assent went through the cabin. A man in row 25 put his bag of trail mix back in his carry-on. The mother in 24B began to cry, silent tears of pure relief. Maria had done this dozens of times now. It was the new standard. It was Imani's standard. And every time she made that announcement, she felt the echo of that terrible night, a reminder of what happened when a voice was ignored. Now she was the one ensuring every voice was heard. The system had been reborn. The pact was being honored. The sky was a little safer. The story of Dr. Imani Carter and Aura Airlines is a stark reminder that one person's voice, backed by truth and resolve, can shake the foundations of a corporate giant. It wasn't just about a food allergy. It was about the fight for dignity, for being seen, and for being believed. Her terrifying ordeal at 35,000 feet became a catalyst for a movement, proving that systemic change is possible when people refuse to accept a reality where profit is valued over human life. Her battle forced an entire industry to re-examine its conscience and its responsibility to every single person who steps on a plane. If this story moved you, and you believe that stories like this need to be told, please take a moment to hit the like button and share this video with your friends and family. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true stories of justice and resilience. By sharing this, you're not just boosting a video, you're amplifying a vital message. Every voice matters, and no plea for safety should ever be ignored. Thank you for listening, or